What's up, Eagles Nation? What's going on, NFL world? How you doing, division rivals? This is Steven Hyder with Gate City Sports Channel, the sports channel where the cerebral NFL fan comes for about 10 minutes of daily content. What's going on, everybody? Once again, my name is Steven Hyder. This is Gate City Sports Channel. If you are new to my channel, if I can ask you to do me a huge favor, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, guys. It's what keeps us motivated as content creators, makes us get up every morning and make these videos, makes us spend our night looking up information, preparing videos, getting things laid out for you guys. It just keeps the heartbeat of the channel going. To all my OGs, you already know what I'm going to ask you to do. Go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, hit that like button. That's how we communicate with YouTube, and that helps us push this content out across the platform so we can bring in new people to talk with. All right, guys. So, in yesterday's video, and if you guys kind of missed yesterday's video, after you watch this video, I'd go back and watch it. I kind of addressed the situation at linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles. I talked about the guys we have under contract. I talked about Camus Grugier-Hill and his free agency. I talked about Nigel Bradham and his contract. I talked about the likelihood of having to cut Nigel Bradham if he does not restructure. I talked about, as big as a fan as I am of Nigel Bradham, as much as I appreciate everything he contributed, he is past 30 years old. He's on that downward trajectory. So today, guys, I wanted to come on here today and I want to talk about the big three. There are three big names in free agency at the linebacker position, especially when we're looking at guys who could potentially play inside. There are three names that you will constantly hear repeated, and that's going to be the focus of today's content. So we are going to talk about Cory Littleton of the Los Angeles Rams, Joe Schobert of the Cleveland Browns, and Blake Martinez of the Green Bay Packers. I'm going to break this up into several little segments, guys, just like I did cornerback. So today we're doing the big three free agents. Tomorrow I'll probably do two or three smaller scale, probably really under key but good signings Eagles could make in free agency. And then the next day I'll probably switch it over to the draft before making a final assessment of everything. But all right, guys, are you ready? Let's jump into the big three targets and what they offer. All right, y'all, let's get to it.
Allen takes it, throws it, bubble screen right side, caught by Spencer, and Matt Wilson got hit.
All right, guys, so my thoughts on this defense in general. I do think at this point, as Eagle fans, we all agree the defense has been neglected for a very long time. And I do think that our coaching staff and front office has lost sight of the fact that if you want to have a high scoring offense, then you need to create field position, and you can do that with turnovers. And I just don't think that in 2018 and 2019 we had the type of defenses that were capable of turning people over. And I think we paid a toll for that. Injuries had a lot to do with it, of course. Some nuances when it comes to game planning and play calling, of course, contributed. But I do think one of the things that gets slept on is the fact that you need to sign players and bring in players in this system that can create turnovers. If you don't do that, I promise you, you will have very similar results. Maybe improve a game, maybe you best two games. But you can also swing a game or two in the other direction as well. If we do not start creating defenses that can turn people over, this team will be dead in the water. I promise you that. So, let's look at the linebackers. Now, I'll admit, any of these three guys, they're likely going to cost you. They're going to cost you at different levels. I do think Cory Littleton will be the most expensive player on this list. But I look at it this way. You got one bona fide stud on this list. You got one guy who would be a massive upgrade over what we have on the roster. And then there's another guy on this list that I think that there are some alarm bells that maybe the Eagles should stay away from this player. Maybe this player isn't quite as good as he's being hyped up to be. And that's basically what my thoughts are about these three guys. But I'm going to take you through the advanced analytics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and I'll tell you why I feel the way I feel about these three players. So let's jump into it, guys. All right, I just wanted to remind everyone before we jump into this how I, going to go the order of these slides, guys. So the first set of slides I will show you will be the advanced analytic metrics used to measure these linebackers, their coverage abilities. The second series of slides I will show you will be the advanced analytics and metrics used to measure their pressure rates and basically their skill as a pass rusher. And then the third set of slides I will show you will deal more with the advanced analytics and metrics used to basically measure kind of their ability against the run and like their range, their range across the field, basically. So without further ado, let's go ahead. Let's jump into this content. And first up, Cory Littleton. All right, so Cory Littleton's pass coverage abilities. To begin with, we all know the Los Angeles Rams were not a very good pass defense throughout the middle of last year. They were so bad in their pass defense that they ended up, in order to improve it, they had to end up basically going and trading for Jalen Ramsey, which has basically now led to this opening to where they're probably going to lose Cory Littleton. I just don't think that they're going to have the budget, the salary cap figure to bring him back, to be honest. So his pass attempts, guys, 85 pass attempts on the season, which for a linebacker, of course, that's a pretty high number. His completions were 61, so 61 out of 85, which comes to a completion percentage of 71.8. His passer rating against him was a 94, certainly higher than you like. I don't think the completion percentage is why that passer rating is so high. I think if you go down to the touchdowns given up, that tells the story. He was credited with giving up 4 touchdowns, but he still did make a play on the ball on 2 separate occasions to walk away with an interception. So, Cory Littleton, he's a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to his coverage abilities. I don't think it's quite fair just because of how victimized that defense was. It gets pretty hard to have to keep going out there and going out there and going out there. So I think that's a little bit of an unknown to his game. I think he's much better than these numbers indicate, but I have no proof to bring forth to you in order to basically justify that opinion other than a gut feeling. My gut feeling is Cory Littleton's a little better of a pass defender than these numbers indicate. But nonetheless, the numbers are the numbers, and that's what the numbers say about him. Okay, Cory Littleton's pressure, kind of pass rush abilities. So on the season, he played a total snap share of 1,055. He was utilized on blitzes 64 times. He registered 2 quarterback hurries, 1 quarterback knockdown, 7 quarterback pressures, and 3.5 sacks on the season. So he looks like he's a somewhat adequate pass rusher. He's not going to look the same as a lot of the 3-4 outside linebackers would look. I mean, who are basically they're pass rushers that are just standing up in a joker position, essentially. With that said, in the same token, like although he played over 1,000 snaps, was only blitzed 64 times, he was pretty successful getting home with 3.5 sacks and 7 quarterback pressures. It's pretty good, decent amount of pressure. So, I mean, would I say this is a strength of his game? Maybe not so much, but certainly not a weakness either. He's an adequate pass rusher, basically. All right, guys, let's take a look at Cory Littleton's run defense and range. So, on the season, he had, 134 total tackles. Pretty impressive number. He was clearly involved. He missed 5 tackles, which to me, if you made 134 tackles, only missed 5 tackles, that's holy shit, that's a good rate. His missed tackle percentage is 3.6%. This is what I think makes this kid a stud. This kid just does not miss tackles. This is a guy, if the money makes sense, and we're going to get into that aspect later on, I think you got to go pick this kind of kid up, man. I mean, yeah, you can be somewhat concerned about his pass, his ability to play the pass, but he's an adequate pass, rush defender, and he's a pretty good run defender. I mean, I wouldn't even say pretty good. Like, he's excellent in run defense. His PFF grade was 78.9. Guys, as I stated in my last video, I am not a huge fan of the PFF grades. The reason I don't particularly like PFF grades is, number one, look how bad they were off in the preseason. But number two, I'm accusing them of being subjective. They're not very transparent with why and how they grade people the way they are, the way other analytic databases tell you exactly what goes into their grading system. Unless you can unlock your stuff, then you need to explain yourself. If you don't explain yourself and how you're giving these grades, then I'm going to say your grades are subjective, and I don't trust them personally. But they graded him at 78.9. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of other grading systems out there to kind of compare off of this, but it is what it is. All right, guys, shaking things up. The next guy I want to talk about, Joe Schobert of the Cleveland Browns. I'm going to be honest with you. This is a guy, as I started really looking into the advanced analytics and metrics used on him to grade him, and I started really following his game film, I liked him a lot. Now, no doubt about it, in 2018, he had a much better season than in 2019. But he was still pretty good in 2019. This is a guy that I think could be a difference maker for the Eagles because he's got a nose for getting the football. He's good at stripping the ball, creating turnovers, picking the ball off if someone lays out there a horrible throw. Like, I like Joe Schobert a lot. I mean, this is a kid that I think if the price is right, he's another one of those guys. I think you got to consider, seriously adding him because it's just hard to find certain talents in 43 defenses where you play a lot of nickel concepts and dime concepts, where you have a lot of nickel corners in. When you're playing big nickel, where you're using a third safety, like, you need to have two very good linebackers if you're going to be good at running that type of system. I think Joe Schobert could possibly give the Eagles that type of flexibility. But let's take a look at how, basically the metrics laid out for him, the advanced analytics and metrics laid out for him for his pass coverage abilities. So on the season, there was 55 pass attempts against him. I think there was a degree of respect for his pass coverage skills. There was 38 completions made against him, which works out to a 69.1% completion percent. I think the year prior, like, he held opposing quarterbacks like 55 or something like that percent completions, maybe even lower. I can't remember exactly, but it was lower than that, and it was a pretty impressive stat line. And you can see how impressive it is when you go to the quarterback's passer ratings. So what he held opposing quarterbacks to in terms of their passer ratings against him. 74.6. It's a good stat line, guys. Touchdowns given up 3, but interceptions 4. He looks like he's an aggressive guy that, he can get beat from time to time. But he also looks like a guy who will get you turnovers. And I do think that is going to be a key for us. All right, y'all, let's keep going on. Let's talk about his pass rush abilities, which would be our second part of this. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Joe Schobert's pass rush ability. So on the season, he played in 1,081 snaps. This guy played a lot of snaps. He was utilized on 74 blitzes, so an uptick in the blitz rate compared to Cory Littleton. He registered 1 quarterback hurry, 2 quarterback knockdowns, 5 quarterback pressures, and 2 sacks. I would say he's about average as a pass rusher. I don't think that's anywhere near the strength of his game. I don't think that I would rate him as being as good as Cory Littleton as a pass rusher, but I don't think that he makes you a liability in that sense either. It's not the strength of his game, but you know what? He ain't gonna hurt you in that regard either. So that's what we're looking at in terms of Joe Schobert's pass rush abilities. Now let's kind of go ahead and let's flip and let's go into that third aspect, and we need to take a look at his actual run defense and his range of coverage. Okay, so Joe Sherbert's run defense and range of motion. Here's the advanced analytics and the metrics used. So total tackles on the season, 133. Pretty respectable number. It means he was in on a lot of plays. But you can see he's nowhere near as good as playing the run as Cory Littleton. Missed tackles, 16. That led him to a missed tackle rate of 10.7%, which to me it looks like anywhere between like 9 and about 11% seems to be the medium, basically, of the NFL when it comes to linebackers. So he's about average there. And his PFF grade was a 59.1. That's what I'm saying. It's a very subjective the way they're grading players out. I just can't see how you can legitimately say that Cory Littleton is almost 20 points, had a 20-point, performance over Joe Schobert. I think Cory Littleton certainly played better last year, but that variability in that scale is way too much for me. I think that they're very subjective in the way they grade people, to be quite honest. I like Joe Schobert. I think this is a guy that if you can get him for under 10 mil, and I don't know if that's possible, guys, because linebacker pay gets kind of expensive. But if you can get him for that 8 to, I'd even say maybe 11 mil, just under what you would pay a Cory Littleton, you're not really breaking the bank here. And you're already about to pay $10 million for Nigel Bradham. So, I mean, I guess if you're looking at this, would you say that Joe Schobert is he a good enough upgrade over Nigel Bradham? And do you think that he could provide? He's a young enough talent and everything like that to maybe take away a little bit from TJ Edwards. I mean, that's where you got to place yourself here when you're talking about these type of guys, because Joe Schobert is definitely better than those guys in pass coverage. There's no doubt about it. He's an adequate, I would even say he's average. I wouldn't even say adequate. He's an average pass rusher, and I would say he's an adequate run defender. So you kind of have to weigh all this together when we're talking about Joe Schobert. All right, let's go into our third guy, which is Blake Martinez. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take a look at the advanced analytics and metrics used to measure basically Blake Martinez's pass coverage abilities. So on the season, he was faced with 74 pass attempts, which is a slightly higher number. Quarterbacks completed 62 of those on him. That's not good, guys. So his completion percentage was 83.8, almost 80. Basically, if you round out, it's 84% on the season. Not good. Opposing passer ratings against him were 102.1. Really not good. Touchdowns given up, 2. Interceptions, 1. Although he was victimized, only seeing 2 touchdowns gives you a little bit of confidence. But I got to be honest with you. This he's definitely a liability in pass cover. As a matter of fact, he's probably way more of a liability than any linebacker currently on the Eagles football team in terms of pass coverage. I don't think Nigel Bradham's that bad. I don't think the young kid TJ Edwards was that much of a liability. You know, we certainly know Nate Gary's not that big of a liability there. I mean, uh, I think even Duke Riley wouldn't be that big of a liability. Like this kid is a liability in pass coverage. All right, so let's take a look at the advanced analytics and the metrics used to basically measure Blake Martinez's pass rush abilities as a linebacker. And I will say this, I was pleasantly surprised because he really seemed to capitalize upon his opportunities. So, Blake Martinez played a total of 1,035 snaps. Played a lot of snaps. They only gave him 24 blitz opportunities, which is a little shocking to me because it's not like he's not a good pass, defender. So why he wasn't being utilized more as a pass rusher because he's a liability if he's dropping back. I don't get it, guys. But when he had his opportunities, he registered 2 quarterback hurries, 1 quarterback knockdown, 5 quarterback pressures, and 3 sacks. I think this is honestly a strength of this kid. I only watched a little bit of his game film, but I will say this about Blake Martinez from what I saw on the game film. Blake Martinez looks like he would be a decent A and B gap pressure guy. This is a kid that if he ended up in a system like Minnesota, which I know Green Bay fans are probably like, don't ever speak that into existence, but still, he ended up in a system like Mike Zimmer's in Minnesota. That could be pretty interesting to see him being utilized in the A and B gap pressure schemes. He's, like I said, guys, he's a big time liability in terms of his pass, coverage. But in terms of the pressure, he's pretty good. I can't knock him there. Okay, moving on to the advanced analytics and metrics used to measure Blake Martinez's run defense in just, range. I'll say this. If you go and look on websites about Blake Martinez, one of the first criticisms you will see from Green Bay Packers sports writers is he does not have the athleticism to warrant, sideline to sideline coverage. That's a big problem they have with Blake Martinez, but he's physical at the point of attack. So it's a bit of a mixed bag with him when we talk about run defense. Total tackles on the season. Be careful, guys. These numbers can hypnotize you. 155. It makes him out to be a tackling machine. But he did miss 18 tackles on the season, which works its way out to a 10.4 percentage. He's not nearly as good as Cory Littleton against the run. That big number, though, the 155 tackles can confuse you. He's about average with his ability to wrap up and bring defenders down, and he lacks certain athleticism. So, moving past the 10.4% missed tackle rate, let's look at his PFF grade. I've said enough about PFF grades. You know I'm not a big fan of them, guys. With that said, they graded him out to be a 58.7. So, I don't know how I feel about that personally. I don't think he was as good as Joe Schobert. He's nowhere near as good as Cory Littleton, but I don't know that he's that bad as they made him out to be. Yes, he's a bit of a liability in pass coverage, no doubt about it. His pass coverage numbers were just atrocious, but he didn't give up a lot of touchdowns. I mean, I guess you can knock him for not really creating a lot of turnovers. I mean, he got to the quarterback, but his pressure rate wasn't, because he was only utilized on 24 blitzes. I don't know. I'm a guy that looks at Blake Martinez and says, in the right system, in the right scheme, a Mike Zimmer type scheme, he could be something special. I don't think he fits the Eagles scheme. I would avoid him. I don't think this kid is a fit in Philadelphia. I just don't. I think he's way too much of a liability. And I don't think that I think our run defense starts at the D line. We can pretty much plug and play most linebackers in there. And of course, Blake Martinez is going to give you something more than a young, unproven guy like TJ Edwards. But I still think TJ Edwards is a good enough run defender to where this kind of move is not necessary. And I feel like you're going to have to back up that Brinks truck to pay Blake Martinez. He's going to want his money because on paper, the guy was very productive. So I would be very cautioned about this type of move. All right, y'all, let me get into my final thoughts here. All right, guys, my final thoughts on today's video. Simply put, as I stated to open this video, I think the Eagles need to add playmakers on defense. We've been trying to get by long enough without actually infusing real talent there. And if we can't find ways of turning our opponents over, I feel like it could be a long season. Also, I think Cory Littleton, I think he's crazy talented, guys. I think he's very underrated, but I also think he could get kind of pricey. I'm hearing the fair market value on Cory Littleton, what the Rams were expecting to pay, I think essentially is $55 million with 35 guaranteed, with roughly 12 to 15 million a season. So probably looking at a 4 to 5 year contract at that price. Now, once you hit free agency, who knows how much that can balloon? I can tell you at the bottom end of that 12 million, I would definitely be in on Cory Littleton. I got a feeling the Eagles would too. But as it gets over that $15 million threshold, I think there's better ways of spending your money, to be quite honest. I think there's other players that can give you an upgrade at linebacker and help you out. So, continuation on that thought of other players who could help you, I think Joe Schobert is the best fit in free agency, especially among these big three, for the Philadelphia Eagles. Look, he's good in pass coverage. He's an adequate to, maybe average run defender, and he's pretty much an average pass rusher. But this kid creates turnovers. He's got a nose for the football. He plays tough. He's going to add to the culture in your locker room. He's going to be a good culture kid. Like, I don't think he's going to cost you too much more, maybe even less than what you're paying Nigel Bradham, and I think he's an upgrade over him. So if his value stays around what we're paying Nigel Bradham, I would cut Bradham, sign Joe Schobert. My personal, thing to watch. So I think the first sign of that would be is if we see the Eagles actually part ways with Nigel Bradham. I think that's an indication of what's about to happen. Not that necessarily will be Joe Schobert. I just think he's the best fit. But I think we know at that point they're going to be looking to add talent at the linebacker position. I think it's a pretty big indicator there. So, my last thoughts of the day here. I don't think Blake Martinez is a fit here. I don't. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but he's not very good in pass coverage. He wasn't utilized, although he made the best of his opportunities as a pass rusher. And he was about average in terms of the score. I mean, he made a lot of plays, but in terms of the missed tackles and things, he's just average in run defense. He lacks certain athleticism you need. He's great at the point of contact. He'd probably give us an upgrade for a couple of years over TJ Edwards, but, he might also stunt the growth of TJ Edwards. That's the other side of it. So I think he's a system guy. I mean, you find someone who plays like a Mike Zimmer type defense that likes to use that A and B gap penetration, maybe they haven't really discovered the full, value of Blake Martinez. I think he would be a good fit in that type of system. But I also expect his price tag to be quite expensive because on paper, the guy looks really good with that stat sheet. So I would pass personally on Blake Martinez, but I understand why some people are pretty big supporters of this kid. All right, y'all. Let's jump into the question of the day. Okay, guys, so before we close out this video, I just want to thank everyone for watching. If you're not subscribed to the channel, if you could please, consider subscribing. Just go ahead and hit that subscription button, guys. It helps more than you know. To all my OGs, if you haven't hit that thumbs up button, come on, man. Help a brother out here. All right. Question of the day, or questions of the day, honestly. All right. Number one, who would you want the Eagles to target in free agency out of these three? So out of Cory Littleton, Joe Schobert, and Blake Martinez, where do you lie at this, guys? Where are you at? Me, I'm Joe Schobert on that list. All right, number two. Do you think any of these guys would risk the development of TJ Edwards? Does anyone think TJ Edwards is good enough to start? That would be my biggest fear, that some of these guys are very similar to what TJ Edwards would be. I do think that you could definitely play, if TJ Edwards keeps progressing and shows that he's as good as he's been in off-ball coverage and he can develop more as a pass rusher. I do think that's a guy you could put beside a player like Joe Schobert, so you could start him potentially down the road. And you got a third guy coming off your bench who could play a lot of pivotal minutes. I think that you would be in a good position to where you could definitely utilize a guy like Nathan Gary as your third off the bench, or even TJ Edwards as your third off, however you want to structure that. I think you would be in a good place there. On to the next question. Would you skip these guys for a lower cost free agents or just play the draft prospect game? All right, y'all. Tomorrow's video, we're going to go over and we're going to talk a little more about maybe some lower tier guys, some guys that won't be quite as expensive, some guys that might keep us within reason to what we can afford. And listen, after that, we're going to get into the draft. We're going to talk about draft prospects. We'll give you that 4 to 5 year contract, and you got it for cheap money. All right, y'all. You know what time it is. It's time to get out of here. You know what we do. We go EADLES. All right, y'all. Let's go Eagles.